What is rules of origin and why is it affecting car makers today? During Brexit negotiations, EU and UK manufacturers struggled with various different challenges, and they may have thought it was all over when the EU-UK Trade Cooperation Agreement was signed in December 2020. However, 2.5 years later, Brexit is still rearing its head, and it's all thanks to rules of origin. Rules of origin for a vehicle state that a certain percentage of the value of the vehicle at production must come from locally sourced components. Built in the UK, it must be made in the UK, and in the EU vice versa. Otherwise, import tariffs of 10% will be applied per vehicle. The TCA came into effect in May 2021, and cars like this internal combustion engine have been complying with the rules since then, quite easily, as their supply chains are very well established and already very localised. However, the problem lies with electric vehicles. Their supply chain is still growing, so the TCA has brought in a phased approach to bring them up to the target level of internal combustion engine in a few years. The next step, percentage increase in their values, comes into effect on the 1st of January 2024. However, with various global crises taking place since the signing of the TCA, car makers are worried about whether they would meet those targets. The EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement states that 55% of the value of the car must come from locally sourced components. The agreement does make provisions for electric vehicles, recognising the supply chain is still in its infancy and growing. Key to this is the fact that the battery itself has a certain percentage of value before it can be considered locally sourced. If it's outside of that, then within the component of the vehicle, it will not count. Currently, 30% of the value of a battery cell must be sourced locally, and 40% of an electric vehicle must also be sourced locally to comply with tariff agreements. But from the 1st of January 2024, it gets more difficult. At that point, 50% of the battery value and 60% of the accumulator or battery pack value must be sourced locally, and 45% of the vehicle as a whole must be sourced locally as well. From the 1st of January 2027, this goes up to the standard car structure. 55% of the value of the vehicle must be sourced locally, and that includes 65% of the battery cell being localized, otherwise it will not comply with rules of origin legislation. If the percentage value target is missed, then a 10% import tariff is applied to those vehicles being shipped to the other market. Here's an example. A typical internal combustion engine car costs €10,000 to produce. €2,000 of that is the engine, which is manufactured outside of the UK or the EU. The car maker has €8,000 to play with, and the threshold of 55% means that €5,500 must come locally. An easy fact to consider when internal combustion engine car supply chains are very localized anyway. For the battery electric vehicle, things get a bit more difficult. Firstly, according to McKinsey, battery electric vehicle drivetrains are 3 to 4 times more expensive than their internal combustion engine counterparts. Secondly, the supply chain is spread far wider than that of internal combustion engines. And battery electric vehicles cost more to produce, mainly because of the battery costs themselves. So let's say a typical battery electric vehicle costs €18,000 to build. 8,000 of that comes from the battery itself, and that is produced externally from the UK or the EU, leaving €10,000 to play with. Under the 45% rule between 2024 and 2026, that means that €8,100 must be sourced locally. In 2027, that goes up to €9,900. When the Trade Cooperation Agreement was first signed, these targets for electric vehicles seemed highly achievable. The market was growing slowly but surely, and car makers had many plans in place. Then COVID-19 hit. That was followed by the production supply chain crisis and the current energy crisis, which is hitting profits across different markets. Suddenly those plans to build local supply chains were in tatters. In addition, electric vehicle sales increased significantly as drivers used their vehicles less and more people became aware of the climate emergency. This meant car makers had to focus on securing supplies as soon as they possibly could, wherever they would come from. They have been unable to put the development and investment needed into building a supply chain in Europe or the UK, especially for battery components, which make up a high value of the vehicle unit. Tim Slatter, chair of Ford Britain and Ireland, had this to say at the recent SMMT International Automotive Summit held in London.
Ford will be making 8 electric vehicles in Europe for the European market, and all of those batteries will be produced in Europe or the UK, but they will still not meet the regulations under rules of origin. That is because what matters is what goes inside of the battery, specifically the cathode active material, which is about 50% of the value of the cell.
As you can imagine, car makers and their representative bodies in the UK and the EU have had plenty to say about the potential of EVs missing the 1st of January 2024 target due to changes in circumstances. Mike Hawes, Chief Executive of the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders in the UK, had this to say.
At a time when every country is accelerating their transition to zero-emission transport, and global competitors are offering billions to attract investment in their industries, a pragmatic solution must be found quickly. We urgently need an industrial strategy that creates attractive investment conditions and positions the UK as one of the best places in the world for advanced automotive manufacturing.
Meanwhile, in a letter to the Secretary General of the European Commission, the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, ACEA, had this to say.
At this critical juncture in our industry's green transformation, the application of unachievable rules of origin will have significant direct consequences in terms of a potential loss of EV manufacturing output in Europe. The payment of massive unnecessary customs duties risks significantly reducing our UK market share in the long term.
Setting up a supply chain locally is not just a case of building a factory and letting it run. Lars Karlström, CEO of Italvolt and Statevolt, said at the recent Move 2023 conference that it can take 18 months to build a gigafactory, a further 15 months to get it running to full capacity, and there's time in between to get the relevant permits needed to operate. That will mean, with UK needing around 5 gigafactories and Europe between 15 and 20, that many of them will need to break ground for their building in 2024, making next year a crucial one if car makers want to meet the 2027 rules of origin targets.